The pen did not simply write history, it decided who had the power to shape it. For thousands of years, a single mark on paper could start a war, end an empire, free a nation, or condemn a person to death. Kings ruled with it. Churches preserved knowledge through it. Revolutions began with it. Long before the keyboard, before the typewriter, before the printing press reached millions, there was one simple tool that quietly controlled the world. How did a sharpened reed become one of the most powerful inventions in human history? This is the story of the pen. The pen did not record history. It decided it. Empires rose and fell, not on the battlefield, but in the moment a signature dried on parchment. Laws, treaties, sentences of execution. The document preceded the deed. The pen was the instrument of power before the sword was even drawn. This is the story of how it happened. The reed was first. In the river deltas of ancient Mesopotamia, around 3200 BCE, Sumerian scribes cut lengths of river reed, trimmed them to a point, and pressed them into wet clay. They were not writing as we understand it. They were recording grain tallies, livestock counts, debt. The earliest texts in human history are administrative documents, inventories, not epics. The first writers were accountants, but the act of inscription had begun. Across the ancient world, the tools of writing diverged. In Egypt, scribes worked with rush stems loaded with ink made from soot and gum Arabic, drawn across papyrus in fast, fluid strokes. In China, the hairbrush emerged by the 3rd century BCE. In Greece and Rome, the stylus, a thin rod of metal or bone, was pressed into wax tablets that could be smoothed and reused. Each civilization developed a writing instrument shaped by the materials available to it, and each writing instrument shaped the writing system that emerged from it. The quill changed everything. The quill pen, cut from the flight feathers of large birds, geese, swans, turkeys, appeared in Europe around the 6th century CE. Its invention was not a sudden breakthrough. It was a gradual refinement, the product of centuries of experimentation by monastic scribes who spent their lives bent over manuscripts, copying sacred texts by candlelight. What they discovered was that the hollow shaft of a feather could hold ink by capillary action, releasing it slowly and steadily under the controlled pressure of a trained hand. The quill was superior to everything that had come before it. It was flexible enough to vary line thickness. It was responsive enough to follow the speed of thought. It was available. Birds were everywhere. Feathers cost nothing. For the next 1300 years, the quill was the dominant writing instrument in the Western world. 1300 years. No invention in the history of writing dominated its field for longer. During those centuries, the quill and the manuscripts it produced became objects of institutional power. The monastic scriptoriums of medieval Europe were not simply libraries. They were the primary sites of knowledge production and preservation. The monks who copied texts controlled what was copied, what was preserved, what was forgotten. The pen, specifically the quill pen in trained hands, was the instrument through which the Church shaped what Europe knew and what it believed. When Charlemagne wanted to standardize literacy across the Frankish Empire in the 9th century, he established palace schools and commissioned scribes to develop a new, clearer script, the Carolingian minuscule, that would be legible across his entire realm. He was, in effect, trying to standardize the output of the pen itself. A consistent script meant consistent communication. Consistent communication meant administrative control. The pen was the nervous system of the empire. This is not a metaphor. It is administrative history. Without written orders, without signed warrants, without lettered instructions, no empire of significant scale could function. The Roman Empire had depended on its postal system and its written edicts to govern a territory stretching from Scotland to Mesopotamia. When the Western Roman Empire fell, the administrative capacity, the pen, the scribe, the written record, contracted with it. The political fragmentation of Europe in the early medieval period was, in part, a story about the collapse of written infrastructure. The recovery of European governance in the high medieval period was, correspondingly, a story about the recovery of the pen's reach. By the 12th and 13th centuries, the growth of universities, legal systems, and commercial trade had created an enormous demand for written documents. Contracts, writs, charters, papal bulls, royal decrees, the volume of writing required to govern a complex society was staggering. Professional scribes emerged outside the monasteries. Stationers established themselves near university towns, supplying parchment and ink, and prepared quills to scholars and lawyers. Writing had moved from the cloister to the street. The printing press arrived in Europe in 1450. Johannes Gutenberg's movable type is one of the most consequential inventions in human history, and its story is well known. What is less often noted is what the printing press did not replace. It did not replace the pen. The press could reproduce a text in quantities no scriptorium could match, but it could not produce an original. It could not draft a letter, sign a contract, annotate a manuscript, or record a thought that had not yet been committed to paper. The pen remained the instrument of original composition, of legal authority, of personal correspondence, of the document that existed in one place, in one hand, bearing one signature. In the 16th and 17th centuries, the pen and the press worked in tandem. The press amplified the pen's reach. A pamphlet that once required a scribe to copy by hand a dozen times could now be reproduced in thousands. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, written with a pen, reached half of Europe within 2 months because of the printing press. The Protestant Reformation was, among other things, a media event, and the pen was its point of origin. The pen also signed the documents that made nations. The Magna Carta was sealed in 1215. The Peace of Westphalia was signed in 1648. The Declaration of Independence was drafted in 1776. The Treaty of Versailles was concluded in 1919. At each of these historical pivots, the defining act was not a battle, it was the pen moving across a document. The man who drafted the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson, wrote it with a quill. He is reported to have gone through several quills in the drafting process, cutting new nibs when the old ones wore down. The document he produced, in his own hand, crossing out words, interleaving corrections, is a manuscript in the oldest sense, something made by hand. The independence of a nation was composed in the same way a monk had composed a prayer 600 years earlier. The steel nib changed the economics of writing. In the early 19th century, machine-cut steel nibs began replacing the quill. The quill had one persistent limitation. It dulled quickly. A professional writer or clerk might sharpen a new quill several times per day. The small penknife, the knife designed specifically for trimming quill nibs, was as essential a desk tool as the pen itself. The word penknife survives in English today as a relic of this dependency. Steel nibs lasted. They could be manufactured identically, in vast quantities, at low cost. By 1850, Birmingham's steel nib factories were producing hundreds of millions of nibs per year, exporting them across the world. Writing instruments that had once required skilled preparation were now disposable commodities. Literacy rates began rising sharply across the industrializing world, and the falling cost of writing instruments was part of the reason. The fountain pen arrived next. The basic concept, a pen with an internal reservoir that feeds ink to the nib without requiring repeated dipping, had been attempted since the 17th century, with mixed and often disastrous results. Ink leaked, mechanisms failed. The technical challenge was controlling the flow of ink precisely enough to make the pen usable, without making it unreliable. Lewis Waterman, an American insurance agent, is credited with the first practical fountain pen in 1884. The story, possibly apocryphal but widely repeated, is that he was about to sign an important contract when his existing pen leaked, ruining the document, and according to the legend, costing him the deal. He spent the next several years developing a pen with a reliable capillary feed system. By the time he patented it, the fountain pen was ready for a world that had been waiting for it. The 20th century brought the ballpoint. Laszlo Biro, a Hungarian journalist, patented a ballpoint pen in 1938, after years of watching newspaper ink dry quickly on the press, and wondering why pen ink could not do the same. His design used a tiny rotating ball at the tip of the pen to transfer a thick, fast-drying ink to paper. It was simple, it was reliable. It worked in conditions, including at altitude, in pressurized aircraft cabins, where fountain pens failed. The Royal Air Force adopted the ballpoint during the Second World War. Milton Reynolds introduced it to the American market in 1945, selling out a department store in New York City on the first day of sales. The ballpoint pen was not just a new product. It was the moment the writing instrument became genuinely universal, cheap enough, reliable enough, and simple enough that anyone, anywhere, could own one. Today, the world produces an estimated 15 billion ballpoint pens per year. The Bic crystal, introduced in 1950 and still manufactured in its original form, is the best-selling pen in human history. It costs roughly 30 cents. The pen that once marked the boundary between the literate and the illiterate, between the powerful and the powerless, between the scribe and the ruled, now sits in a cup on a desk in a dentist's waiting room. The object is unchanged in its function. It transfers a substance to a surface in order to preserve a mark. It has done this for 5,000 years, in clay and ink and graphite and gel. What has changed is who holds it. What has changed is what holding it means. For most of human history, the pen was accessible. Access to law, access to commerce, access to knowledge, access to power. A person who could not write was a person who could not leave a will, sign a contract, file a complaint, record a debt, or send a letter. They existed in the written record only as objects, as names in someone else's census, numbers in someone else's ledger. The democratization of the pen was, in a quiet but measurable way, the democratization of the self. Empires did not fall to armies alone. They fell when enough people could write, when enough people could draft a petition, print a pamphlet, circulate an argument, and sign their names to a declaration. The pen did not fire a shot. It did not need to. It decided who was allowed to speak, and then, slowly, it gave that power to everyone. The object sitting in your pocket right now is the inheritor of 5,000 years of that history. Use it accordingly. Next story, we're uncovering the hidden history of toothpaste, a story of strange ingredients, painful experiments, and the surprising invention that changed the way the world smiles.